Hi, I'm Em.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Bea!
Hello, Em, you're back!
I am back. I'm so sorry, guys. I didn't mean to be gone. I got sick. I had a really bad cold. And don't do it, kids. It's rough. I traveled, and then I got back, and then I had a cold. And that's not fun. But I'm a little bit better now. If I sniffle, I'm sorry. It is great to be back. You guys, you and Ace had a really fun time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without me. That was so weird.
In spite of you being gone, we had a very fun time.
It was like, you know, having a conversation with a friend without your parents in the room at like a sleepover. It was like late at night. So that was what the feeling I got was. It was super fun. So yeah, I'm back, and this is the pre-episode before the end of season 2. Can you believe that we're recording the semi-final episode of season? That's oh my gosh. It's so intense. Like, I can't believe we got through it. I can't believe we got through season 2 so quickly. It feels like, man, a lot of life has happened since the beginning of season 2, but it's been so amazing. We've been getting a lot more listens this season, which is great. And I'm excited for the last episode, which is going to be our Lotus Eaters Fic Club episode by Aldora89. If you have not read it, please go and read it. I don't think that you'll have time now to read it and then send an email. But if you have read it and haven't written the email yet, please go ahead and send it, because it's really a fun time when people send us emails. And if you haven't read it, don't worry about sending in an email. Go and read it. It's really fantastic. Aldora89 deserves all the love. Comment on all of the chapters. It's a really fantastic fic. So yeah, Lotus Eaters, final episode. We also have a Patreon. If you want to support us on Patreon, go ahead. The link is in the show notes. It's a fun time out there, and we incredibly we are so grateful for any support that we get, be it just listens or monetarily. It's just amazing that people are willing to do that for us. We also have our podcast on Apple, and we have had some reviews on there, and we would really, really appreciate it if you really like us or you really hate us. Go ahead and leave a review. We would love to hear your opinion on what we're doing. Not that we need it, but we would like to hear it. It sounds neat. So, with that being done, and hearing my incredibly nasal voice, what are we talking about today in our pre-last episode of season 2, Bea?
We are going to talk about another trope that you can find in almost any fandom I've found, and that is, you see both tropes, but I'm kind of squishing them together. It's arranged marriage or a forced marriage. I think they are subtly different, but they have enough overlap that it really is just easier to talk about them together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, with that subtle of a difference, it's good to push them together into one episode. This is a trope that I don't tend to read all that often, unless it's like a really sweet thing, because it kind of, it ends up normally being sweet, but like the trope kind of reminds me of like, I don't know, like what we were talking about in Dark Fic, like slavery tropes and stuff like that. But it's not. It ends up usually being like a, kind of a happy accident. And we'll get into it and stuff, but it just reminded me of that. I haven't read enough of this to talk about, like, for the entire thing. So it's mostly going to be you, Bea, talking about this. But it's a fun marriage. Sorry, not fun marriage. It's a fun trope, in my opinion, sometimes. Like, there's a fic that we are doing for Fic Club next season that is about this kind of, and it's not bad at all. It's just
Mm-hmm.
very sweet. So we'll talk about it. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the whole trope be?
The trope is pretty much what it says on the tin. It is where characters, through any number of circumstances, are either forced to get married or they've somehow, it's been arranged that they're going to get married. And the difference is when they're forced, again, it's almost semantic. This Venn diagram has so much overlap, but there are times when they're sort of forced by circumstances or an antagonist to get married, and it wasn't arranged beforehand. It's kind of spontaneous. So think Shotgun Wedding. You know, these characters have been found in a scandalous position, and their reputation in society is going to go down the drain if they don't immediately get married. It wasn't arranged beforehand. It was not a long-term plan or something that had a clever machination. It was quick, we need to get married, and there will be consequences if we don't. On the other hand, if there's arranged marriage where it can be this long-standing thing between them, and sometimes they were childhood sweethearts and it's not really angsty or anything, it's just, it's been foreordained basically. Or sometimes it's through complicated political scheming, they have both decided that it is advantageous for them to have a marriage, and so they arrange to be married in order to further their own goals or whatever. So they're not really forced into it. They're electing to do it, but it is arranged. Or sometimes they're just deeply indifferent, and they're just like, sure, why not? Might as well get married. And so again, there is a difference between the two, but in both cases, it sort of hinges on the idea that it wasn't necessarily romantic before they entered this relationship. Whatever they were before, they sort of moved on to the next level without, a big proposal and 100 dates or whatever it is that is the criteria for two characters to be in love enough to form a legal union. They didn't meet that. They just jumped right into it. Usually. Arranged marriages, like I said, can be a little bit different. Sometimes they're childhood sweethearts.
That's true, yes. And sometimes they know each other their whole lives knowing that they're going to get married one day. That's also a thing.
This trope, I have to assume, knowing what I know about literary tropes in general, had to have come from romance novels, because it is also
absolutely
a staple of romance novels.
It so is, like, 100%. And a lot of times it's the one where what you described near the beginning of your list, where it was like they were caught in a compromised position and they have to get married. I have read that so often in romance novels. Oh my god.
Yeah, gotta save that reputation.
Oh, there's a book. There's actually one particular romance novel that I can recommend. It's not too terrible. It's called This Is All I Ask by Lynn Kurland, who, if you're going to read like pulp romance novels, Lynn Kurland's pretty good, especially her old stuff from like the 90s and early 2000s. That stuff's pretty good. Lynn Kurland wrote that novel in 97, and it is an arranged marriage. So go ahead and read that, because if you need a brush up on arranged marriage romance novel pulp fiction, go ahead and read that, because it's actually pretty sweet. It's a very sweet novel. Anyway, go on, Bea.
It's interesting you bring that up, because this trope can be kind of bipolar. I've seen it done where it is played very, very sweet. Everything is kind of fairy tale-esque and nice. Sometimes there's a little bit of conflict, usually external. Think Sleeping Beauty, where her marriage was arranged when she was a baby, but ultimately she does pretty quickly fall in love with her intended, and they don't really have any interpersonal problems with it. It's kind of external forces, and then at the end they do live happily ever after. And there's never a problem with the convention itself. It's the fairy tale elements of Maleficent and at least initially the three fairies who are like, no, you can't marry him, you already are arranged to be married. Oh, well, joke's on you. The person you're going to marry is the person you're in love with. Yay. Uh, um,
I wish, man.
I am quite sure, a hilarious Shakespearean parody of that in which there's a twin brother involved, but that's an entirely different story.
12th Night is one of the best, okay? I absolutely adore that one so much. And everybody needs to go watch 12th Night or As You Like It. I think that's the rest of the title. Or that's what it was
As
once.
You Like It is a completely different play.
Oh, Like You Do? I don't know.
I'm not sure that 12th Night has a secondary title, or if it does, I don't know it.
I promise. I'm looking it up. This is what the show has become. This is what the episode has become now. 12th Night. Or What You Will.
What You Will. Okay.
Yes. That's I love it. I absolutely love it. 12th Night or What You Will is just
Shakespeare.
It's my favorite comedy of Shakespearean plays of all of his.
Just call it whatever. I don't care anymore. That's what the secondary title is yeah, something, whatever you want.
Or what you
name
will.
It yourself.
Or What You Will. Oh, I love it so much. Anyway, what were you talking about?
But yeah, sometimes it's the trope itself is very, very sweet, but it also has like darker connotations. People who really dig into the you don't have a choice in the matter aspect of it, and it can get dark, which we'll discuss down the line. I would say that this trope, like I said, it's pretty widespread and it fares pretty well in most fandoms, although the ones that it feels more native to tend to be fantasy or historical, quasi-historical, whatever you will. So think Harry Potter quite enjoys this trope, and it's fantasy. The Hobbit likes this trope. Game of Thrones likes this trope. All of them are fantasy. On the other hand, the Avengers or Teen Wolf, you're probably not going to see this trope in at least a canon adjacent sort of a fic. You will see it in fantasy AUs or historical AUs, which is why I think it's so widespread, is it's pretty easy to kind of blend it in with some of the other big tropes and get something that works in most fandoms. And because it has such a wide range of tones, it also appeals to a wide range of people in the fandom. Generally. I mean, these are all very broad brush kind of a statements, so take that as it is.
I mean, it can be like, if you are super into dark fic, then you can find an arranged marriage that is dark fic. If you are super into fluff, arranged marriage, you can still find it. You wouldn't think you could, but you definitely can with the fic that we're doing for Fic Club next season. If you need something in between, if you need hurt comfort, arranged marriage can help you with that. Like, it's good.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's one of those tropes that actually, like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You would think that an author would go a specific way, but they will go the actual opposite way with it. It's a very chameleon trope, in my opinion, because there are some tropes that really only go with fluff, really only go with womp, really only go with dark fic. But arranged marriage, you would think, would only go to the darker side of story, but it doesn't. It can go lots of places, which is nice.
I think it's also important to note here that we're not talking about all of the different kinds of marriage tropes, narrative tropes, because there are several that are also really common that are not this, or they're related to it and they can overlap, and there are stories that you see them all in, but they are different. Specifically, marriage of convenience, it definitely plays nicely with this trope, the idea that people look at a legal or political arrangement and go, yeah, okay, it's just easier to go along with it. Fake marriage and relationship, again, it goes great, but technically different. Accidental marriage, which is the opposite of this in terms of, yes, they both ended up married, but why? Yeah, instead of you had to do it and you had no choice, it was, whoops, we didn't mean to do that. Which, yeah, okay, marriage and an institution is a lot funnier when you consider that both of these things are within the realm of belief. That it's both something you can be forced into and do on accident. Like, hilarious. But we're not going to be talking about those. So if you're thinking this whole time, like, but what about that one thing, or what about, and you're thinking of one of those guys, that's a later episode. We will get to it, we promise. Yeah, I think let's talk about why people like it, and
Okay.
then maybe some things about it that are either, your mileage may vary, or things that people don't like about it. Right off the bat, one of the nice things about this trope, and this may be restating the obvious in terms of what a trope is, but because it is shorthand, because it is something that you're familiar with, it's great at just sort of skipping that initial little piece of the story where an author's trying to convince you of the ship.
Oh, yeah.
Like this particular trope, because these characters, the premise is that they will be in a relationship, kind of whether or not they want to be. The author doesn't need to convince you that they're in love off the bat, because that's unimportant at the time. The initial onset of this narrative, nobody cares whether or not they love each other, or we care very little. It's after that that they can do some convincing if they want, or just proceed forward with the presumption that they like each other enough. It's fine. And so in fic, at least, that's really nice, especially if you're already kind of sold on the ship, that you don't have to listen to a couple dozen pages of an author trying to sell you a ship you already like. You're like, no, they're together. Proceed.
Oh, man. I mean, you don't need that in fic, like you said. You just don't even
I
need
mean,
it
sometimes
sometimes.
you do. A really, really good slow burn. Yeah,
True.
the convincing is part of the joy of the thing.
Very true.
Yeah, this trope also can lead to some really interesting world building. I've kind of said a couple of times now that some of the reasoning for why a marriage is forced or arranged can deal in these machinations, political or otherwise. Maybe it's just social positioning, your classic Regency AU. But especially in AUs, a lot of authors take time to build up this picture of the world where things are not quite canon, but it's enough like canon that you see echoes. And sometimes it's fascinating what they do to get all their little cogs turning in the correct direction to get the story going, or even when they take canon kind of as is and add in pieces, a la The Hobbit. Because Tolkien did not exactly go on and on about the courtship of dwarves. Uh,
Yeah.
so authors get to kind of play around and figure out what they like. And we talked about it in the Hobbit episode. One of the great things about Hobbit fic is their funky little courtship rituals that people keep putting in. And things like forced or arranged marriage, you suddenly are like, okay, that, but more. Let's talk about, like, what are the political ramifications of, say, a hobbit marrying a dwarf, and why would they be forced to do it? It's fun.
The namesake by Yumpa Lahiri. I think that's how her name is pronounced. I'm really sorry if it's not. Um, it is a fantastic book that gets you into the just world culture of people from India, and of people who, like, it starts off with the mother of the main character getting married to a man in an arranged marriage, which is why I remembered this novel. And it ends up being, like, just very sweet. And the main character is their son in the novel, who grows up in the United States because they emigrated to the United States. And he just grows up seeing them love each other, even though that they were arranged. Because that's much more of a thing in India, I think, to have an arranged marriage. And to see it through the eyes of an author like Mrs. Lahiri, it's very fascinating. There's no judgment or anything like there would have been if it had been a white person writing it. But there's also, like, it talks about, how some things that could be bad with it. She just got lucky. Some people didn't get lucky. And it's just a really fascinating book. I would totally recommend it. I know I keep talking about books and not I keep reading about like arranged marriages in actual novels instead of fic, which is weird because most people are it's the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want another example of arranged marriage in a novel, go read that. Also, you won't regret reading about like the culture of India, of a certain part of India. It's really fantastic. But yeah, the world building in that book was really fascinating to somebody who doesn't know anything about the culture from India. To me, it was world building because I didn't know anything about it. But if there's somebody who's Indian, like it's just talking about their culture, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
like you really get to immerse yourself in something that you don't know about and are interested in. And I think that is easy for people who are interested in marriage, fake marriage. It's good for them to like they get to have fun doing that too when it comes to a fake marriage, because
Mm-hmm.
what is happening within the society where where a fake marriage or an arranged marriage, sorry, not fake marriage, where an arranged marriage is happening, like what is happening in society, the society that they're living in,
Mm-hmm.
that an arranged marriage is like seemingly fine. It's kind of the usual, you know.
Yeah. It's surprisingly hard, as somebody who does think about this, like to construct a delicate enough situation where marriage appears to be the only way out. Because when you actually think about it,
Yeah.
how many situations are there in which marriage is the only option? Very few. And so
Huh.
it's always fun to see people build their worlds in such a way that becomes the solution that is the most path of least resistance at the very minimum.
Especially when you are not writing in a society that has sexism.
Mm-hmm.
When it's two dudes or two women, or, you know, when it's not about the a woman needing to get out of their house and finally have a life, but an
Mm-hmm.
only like the only way that she can do that is by getting married.
Mm-hmm.
Cuz that's how a lot of that's why that's partly why women dealt with arranged marriages even if their husband was shitty.
It's very world building is something that again this it can do really well. I've also seen stories in which it is sort of a side note, a minimum. Like a lot of fan fiction, I feel like the amount of concerted effort on any one narrative point, like building block, is extremely variable for most tropes. And I mean that in a good way. Not all stories should be about world building, despite my obvious
True.
enjoyment of it. That just
Mine
isn't
too.
the focus. Yeah, this trope also has just some really good built in tension to it. Like, as an author, sometimes it's really hard to maintain stakes and get your problems to be big enough and serious enough to really keep the story rolling long term. And this one, it's pretty easy. Like, the stakes are there. You need to stay married or else. And insert
Yeah.
sufficiently dire thing.
Yeah, I mean, if, you know, like the antagonist, like maybe there's like an antagonist where if you aren't married anymore, then the antagonist will like kidnap the other person. I've
Or
seen
try
that
and marry them
before.
themselves, or reveal a
Exactly.
terrible secret, or you'll be disowned,
Exactly.
or there will be
Yes.
war.
Yes, yes.
So many things you can do.
It's great. And it's kind of a it's kind of a trope, like you're pushing two people in a cabin and they have to wait out a winter and be
Hmm.
like, okay, now you better get comfortable with each other or else.
Yeah.
And
It
it's kind of
also
nice.
it has some, and I mean this is an umbrella term for a lot of different variations on this trope, but it feels like it's got some baked in enemies to lovers. Um
Yes.
I
Yes.
guess you could also
Maybe like
you could say it's
neutral people.
strangers to lovers, but
Yes. Yeah.
it could be a
Strangers
lot
to
of different
lovers.
variations. It could be enemies, it could be strangers, it could be, I can think of many different
I mean, most relationships are strangers to friends, strangers to lovers, strangers to enemies.
and so on
But
and so
like,
on. Like,
yeah.
you can play it lots of different ways. It just feels like that idea is baked in, which is wonderful because a lot of people like that. So, I mean, you get a good you get a good story that's got you have to get married and then you're strangers to lovers and there's some hurt comfort in there and great stuff. Good
Mm,
stuff. Maybe there was only one bed.
I haven't said it in a while, okay? But I am a whore for hurt comfort, okay? Everybody who's newly listening now needs to know this, that M is a whore for hurt comfort, and I will always be a whore for hurt comfort. I love it so much. It's
On
true,
the
though. I agree with your
mhm,
suspicion that there is kind of a enemies to lovers, like, D&E strand in this trope, I would say.
mhm.
Baked in is a good phrase for that. Because
Yeah.
there's kind of an animosity. Both of them don't really want to be marrying each other,
Mhm.
right? But they
At least
have to.
theoretically.
At
Again,
least
arranged marriage
theoretically.
can be kind of weird sometimes.
True, sometimes one person really wants to marry them and the other person doesn't know what the hell is happening. Um, sometimes they both don't want to marry each other because they wish they had the choice. Sometimes one feels an honorable duty to do it and the other one's like, fuck honor and duty. That kind of
Mhm.
stuff. It is, there's always a little bit of friction between them,
Mhm.
right? Which really makes it delicious to read when they end up loving each other, which is what this trope kind of is. It usually ends up, unless it's dark fic, it usually ends up being a good, nice relationship near the end.
Mhm. Which is something I feel like I don't want to cast I guess moral judgments on whether these are good things or not, because I think they can be
Mm,
good things and they can be bad things depending on how well it is done and to which audience they are playing. But one of the things, neutral quantity, that this trope does is they're not necessarily the same subsets of this trope, but it does play nicely with kind of Omegaverse and Impreg, especially in fantasy settings, because I think a lot of people like to see that classic romance novel ending where it's babies ever after, they've gotten together, they fell in love, and now they have kids. I would say this is
yes.
especially popular when the forced marriage aspect has something political about it. You're going to stop that war by marrying the foreign prince. So they have the heir, they secure the alliance, and everything is literally happily ever after the end. And so I know that there are a fair number of people who do not enjoy that. I guess it is best to know up front that that is one of the types of tropes that plays well. Another set of tropes that these three tropes don't really go together. It's sort of a one or the other because your Omegaverse and your Impreg and your arranged marriage or forced marriage tends to be fairy tale esque, very happy, fluffy. On the other hand, this trope plays really nicely with kind of, and I'm going to have to explain this one because it's not necessarily oh yeah, of course. Slave AUs or just dubcon in general kind of goes with it because just like there's some baked in enemies to lovers, there's some baked in dubcon here, if for nothing else because in a forced marriage, at least one party does not have any interest in actually being married.
Or didn't have a say in it,
Mm-hmm.
which in itself is
It's
non-consensual.
yeah, you have
It's
no
not that
you
maybe they don't. Maybe it's not that they don't want it, but that they didn't have a choice to not want it.
mm-hmm. Which yeah, dubcon, dubious
Yeah,
consent.
very dubious.
Um, and I'm going to explain sort of my broad statement about slave AUs. Yes, there can be ones where through a convoluted series of events, you do get a slave being forced into marriage, usually as a concubine, to another character. Those tend to be darker fics. There's also, I'm going to call them like conqueror AUs. They usually go under like a warlord AU, where X person's land, home, people, whatever, have been kidnapped, conquered, uh, destroyed, and they are forced to then marry the conqueror, which is by default pretty dang dubious. All of which I would kind of say are flavors of dark fic. There's
Yeah.
also a tendency for some authors to put in things that kind of squick people out. I already mentioned some of them. There's impreg, of course. There's slave AUs, of course. There is the non-consent. There's also the fact that, arranged or forced marriages aren't a fake thing. They're a real thing that real people have to deal with that can, I guess, theoretically work out well, a la an arranged marriage, like in The Namesake, I believe is what the book is called, where all's well that ends well. But it can also be a very traumatizing thing, and to sort of make it this romantic trope is sometimes a little bit squicky to some people. And it's not to say that the trope, stories that use the trope can't be having a very serious dialogue with this real world issue. It's just to say that they generally don't. Um, Also, things that can squick people out. This can sometimes be used by authors who I hmm, I don't know a better way to say it than they want to force a ship. Either it's usually unpopular or very rare ships that people sometimes have some moral issues with or don't enjoy, and this author is really dead set on making it happen. And this can be range anything from it's just unpopular and they're just making it happen because they like it, to things that people have moral issues with, a la huge age gaps, or an adult character marrying a minor. And so sometimes you end up in situations where the story itself is very blatant about, this relationship is gonna happen, and sometimes that it's pushy. People don't like that, or they don't like the ship and the fact that the narrative is so intent on textually supporting it, kind of irrespective of chemistry or people's opinions. A good example is there is the ever infamous Harry Potter fandom. And the Harry Potter fandom is fond enough of this particular trope that it actually has its own subtrope called marriage law fix. And the premise
Yes.
of the marriage law is it was based on a challenge era that was given in 2003 that was specifically the idea of the Ministry of Magic decided that after the Wizarding War, in an effort to promote the population and I guess maybe peace, they were going to make purebloods marry muggleborns or half-bloods. And it was going to be arranged, and I think there was basically like you could put in your name to marry a specific person, but I'm not entirely sure how that worked, to be honest. And the challenge originally, I believe, specified that it was supposed to be between Hermione and Snape. A pairing that I think a lot of people could see a lot of problems with. Not the least of which is the fairly large age gap and power disparity between the two of them throughout the actual canonical story. This was also set in 2003. It was before it was revealed that Snape was, in fact, a half-blood, not a pureblood, so just in case anybody went, wait, what? Yeah, this was before that, when everybody thought he was a pureblood. The actual marriage law trope has since broadly expanded, and it has essentially become just the idea that for a variety of reasons, the Ministry of Magic, usually, or some other governing magical body, has insisted that magical people get married to other magical people. It is now a law. What shape and form that looks like depends on the author, and it's basically in support of whatever ship they want. So if it's because they want to support the population, then most of the time it is a heterosexual ship, unless of course people are like, no, this is Magic World, we can do what we want, in which case they're like, and now men can have babies and it's really any ship that we want. It's quite popular in Voldemort wins AUs too. It's all of which is to say, this fandom is an excellent example of some of the things that people might not like about the tropes, specifically the idea of a relationship between, at least for most of the narrative, someone who is canonically a minor, a la Hermione, getting married to an adult and being forced to by the politics, the governing body of her world, to get married to him, and how a lot of people might look at that and go, that's not romantic, that's wrong, and why maybe they were like, hey, that I'm not really going for that ship. It again, it's complicated, and I would argue that most of the time, if that's tried to be played off as fluffy, it doesn't work super well. And if it is not, it borders on dark fic, in which case, I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like most dark fic, if they try to then produce a happily ever after, you always kind of squint at it suspiciously, like, wait,
Yeah.
this character was just systemically traumatized on page. Are we really sure we believe in happily ever after?
Ooh. Yeah, it's not. It falls flat when
Mm-hmm.
uh unless the author worked really hard to get it to a place where you feel comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
them getting a happy ending. It can really feel like a slapped on lipstick on a pig kind of a
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Yeah.
It's not awesome.
Yeah,
When you've
this.
just experienced a lot of pain with the character, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
like, and then they were fine. No,
Yeah.
they weren't. Oh man, they will never be okay unless they get some serious help.
Yeah, this trope is, yeah, it broad spectrum. It so many fandoms, so many different flavors. You get it's good, it's bad, it's in between. Um and
Yeah,
it's in that respect, it's a lot of its strengths or its weaknesses, I guess. So the fact that it is such a nice little shorthand, and authors don't have to convince you of the ship, is also kind of a weakness, because then a lot of authors don't bother to actually flesh out the romance. They're like, no,
true.
they're married, it's obviously romantic, and you're like, no, no, come on, where's the chemistry, where's the love? And then it never appears.
It's like a lot of it's a handful of rom-com movies that I have seen where it's like, well, it was a dude and it was a lady. They obviously need to get together. Oh yeah, and they're hot. Like they need to get together.
About half of the Hallmark Christmas movies that they put out there.
I would say 75%. Um,
Okay, that's fair. I haven't watched enough. I get about 5 minutes in, and they get to
yeah.
and they hate each other part, and I go, yep, boy howdy, do they hate each other. And then they try and be
Okay.
like, but there was attraction, and I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure they just hate each other.
Okay. But seriously though, if anybody listening needs a good needs a good Christmas romantic movie, like a Hallmark movie, but definitely not Hallmarky, go watch Love Hard on Netflix. It came out last year, and um it's very funny and it's really good. Like so much better than you would expect, like 10 times better than any Hallmark movie ever. Um but yeah, like please go and watch it because it deserves some love. Love Hard is really good. Like I keep wrecking things that are not fic during this episode, but like that
This
movie is
trope is just
so
really
funny.
broad reaching. It has its fingers in
It's
all the
true.
pies.
There's no arranged marriage in that, but there is fake dating. I love a good fake dating thing.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of fic a lot when watching it actually. And there's also another one called oh no, it's a movie that came out last year as well, but it's I think it's on Netflix. It's two gay guys and it's a fake relationship, and he's bringing his roommate who has to pretend to be his boyfriend to like home, and they end up falling in love. Um, and it literally, I was like, this is just a fan fiction. They just took a fic and then they wrote a script. We really need to do an episode on that, about how a lot of production companies are just taking fandom stuff and now making stuff with it. We should do an episode on that.
There is I'm going to call it a subtrope because I think it fits in here, but it's kind of its own thing and it doesn't feel like it fits, which is the mail order bride.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like it fits because on the one hand you're going, but you literally went through all of the steps to like acquire a spouse. Why is this something that was forced upon you? And the answer is it's mostly forced upon the mail order bride, who also at least theoretically semi-volunteered for the position, depending on the story. There can be other circumstances involved in that, but I'm going to say that it's a subtrope because there's a certain amount of these specific characters did not choose each other. It wasn't about romance. This was arranged through a company and they are making it work. It sits in a weird space. But this will be important later, friends, because otherwise, sadly for all of you, I didn't have a rec if this doesn't count. So, put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. But Eros and Psyche, so I had a question about arranged / forced marriages. And it has to do with the Greek myth Eros and Psyche, which, for those of you who are not aware, in brief, is Eros, who is a child of Aphrodite, falls madly in love with a mortal woman, Psyche, and they end up getting married, but as part of the deal, she can never ever see him. So,
which, like, rude.
Yeah, great marriage that. I'm sure they had just absolutely beautiful conversations together. So she never sees him, but he does manage to show up in bed each night, so we can tell where his priorities are. So she eventually ends up visiting her family, and her family's like, well, that's super whack. That's not cool. Here, have a candle since you haven't figured out how that works. At which point she proceeds to look at his beautiful, beautiful face, and he instantly wakes up because she drips hot wax on him because she is obviously not the brightest crayon. And, the contract of the marriage is broken, so he disappears into the ether, and being a Greek myth, it's all very sad. She regrets her life choices because she had the very prettiest husband and now she don't.
Yeah, but he could have been a monster, she didn't know.
You know what? If you've been sleeping in the same bed for that long, I'm not sure you're in a position to really quibble.
True, maybe
it's a little late.
Know. It's not fair. Why does there have to be that caveat? She should be able to see her spouse. I mean, it's not like she was blind. I don't know. Gosh.
That would have been an interesting twist.
It would have been.
So, Eros and Psyche, there's a fairy tale by the name East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which is essentially Eros and Psyche, except that instead of her not being able to see him, he spends most of his time as a bear, and she just doesn't know who the frick is creeping on her bed.
I've heard about that. Yes, I've heard about that.
And she has to, fight a troll queen for his hand in marriage. It's very awesome. But East of the Sun, West of the Moon is very similar to Beauty and the Beast, which leads to me to think that they're all actually probably pretty connected. The idea of a woman going to go live with a man in a secluded place, knowing very little about his history, so on and so on. It begs the question, does that count as a forced marriage? I mean, knowing that there are variations on all of these stories where them being married, quote unquote, is somewhat dubious in the first place.
Well, it's all the thing is, for all three of those, I don't know about the Sun and the Moon one. For all three of those, though, I'm assuming it was a decision. Yes, there were consequences if they didn't make the quote unquote right decision.
Is that not the essence of forced marriage, though? That there will be dire consequences?
But all three of them could have decided not to.
But the consequences would be dire.
No, okay. Yeah, okay. That's true. I mean, maybe not for Psyche though. That's the thing. Psyche didn't need to marry him.
Yes.
Like she would have been semi okay. I mean, it wasn't like her family was going to disown her if she didn't, right?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I don't think that's part of the myth. She
Hmm.
just married somebody and didn't know him. So it
Yeah.
was an arranged marriage in that way, but she didn't have to. But maybe society was pushing her. I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, all of them are arranged marriages.
Or at least, there's some
Like
significant
adjacent ones.
pressure.
Semi
Yeah.
adjacent. Yeah. Arranged marriage.
It all of which is to say, to come circle back to the topic, this is not a completely random tangent. I have seen not so much Eros and Psyche, but fairy tale AUs, Beauty and the Beast AUs that do have that sort of a flavor to them. And so I was like, does that count then as sort of a tangentially related, a distant relative, a child trope? I'm not sure.
A child trope.
They went off with
Well,
another trope and had a baby.
yeah, and one of those babies, because they had multiple, one of those babies is fake relationships. We're definitely planning on doing an episode on fake relationships because you would
Mm-hmm.
think it had a lot to do with arranged marriages. It really doesn't. It's way different.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot less circumspect.
Or at the very least, they don't always overlap. I mean, you could make them overlap.
Yeah, you could. I think it's time for recorder. Oh man, my poor little voice couldn't do that very well. Do you want to go first?
Sure. My rec this week is But Hey, You're All Right by Beardsley. This is a Stucky fic, and it is alternately kind of tragic and hilarious. The idea is that Tony, in his usual Tony E fashion, kind of slings his money around without thinking and ends up accidentally on purpose purchasing for Steve a Russian mail order bride, who ends up to be less bride and more husband. I'm not sure we have an equivalent groom. Groom, yes, mail order groom, and yes, it
Mail
is
order groom.
Bucky. um, and Steve goes, "Oh, it's Bucky." Wait, no, he's very clearly Russian and very clearly, not dead. So not Bucky, but Bucky. And so he sort of ends up agreeing to marry him in order, if nothing else, to let him stay in the country. It's really cute, and it does have a happy ending, and it's not very long. It is short, but it will make you smile. So yeah, hence the brief tangent back into this subtrope, because I could not find for you any arranged or forced marriage that I was super happy with to wreck. So
Yeah, I was in the same boat. But the one fic that I did find that is of the most marriagey type of fic that you can find within the OOQ fandom, because I'm still on that kick. It's called Wheelhouse by Recrudescence. I think that's how you pronounce it. And let me just read you the summary. The one where Bond really, really isn't used to sleeping with people who don't tragically die soon afterward. And it's very cute. It's short. It's only one chapter, and I think it's like 6,000 words, 6K. So it's really just Bond realizing the depth of his feelings for Q and really not wanting him to die because he's expecting Q to die because they get together, and that always happens to Bond. It's very sweet. Like, you know, protective Bond is like my favorite thing. The only reason why I got into Bond fic was because I watched the last one with Daniel Craig, and I'm so sorry to anybody who hasn't seen it. This is a big spoiler, okay? But he becomes a dad. He has a kid with somebody in the movie,
a
and
lot of that going around.
I know. And I have never been more attracted to Daniel Craig in my entire life, seeing him hold a small child and try to protect her. Like, I was like, oh my god. And protective bond is of somebody he loves, like actually truly loves, is like crack to me. So I love it. It's very sweet. It's the most marriagey thing you'll ever get in the OOQ fandom, because you're not going to get a marriage scene. He doesn't marry people. That's just not part of that whole shtick with Bond.
That creates a legal paper trail, and therefore your enemies can find you.
Exactly. So just, yeah. I love it. I love it. Go ahead and read it if you want. Go read Bees too, because I think it sounds good. I haven't read it yet, but I will.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think that we did a good job. Thank you, Bea. Mm-hmm. This was great. But I think we're done.
So I guess we'll see y'all next week on
Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!